Hello, everybody. I'm here I'm Surfer Eddie, first of all, joined by my friend Marcel, also known as Revanchist. Hello, Marcel.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you for joining us. Marcel and I, we're going to be celebrating and having a discussion of this amazing epic, Tales of the Jedi comics. They were released from 1993 to 1998, roughly. And this storyline takes place roughly almost 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. So it's not really going to be a review, just a casual conversation, memories, the impact that this storyline had in the overall expanded universe, how and why we love it, and how we discovered it overall. So this is the second part of Tales of the Jedi. What consists of this storyline is Tales of the Jedi, also known as Knights of the Old Republic back then in the Dark Horse era. Freedom Not Uprising, Dark Lords of the Sith War, and Redemption. So five amazing story arcs. And I'll give you my memory first as far as how I encountered this or discovered this comic book series. I was in a comic book shop and I just saw a bunch of Star Wars comics. At that point, I had no idea or never delved into the expanded universe. I had heard about, you know, that books were published, but had no idea about comics. So this was a great surprise. I never read one novel at that point. So this was a great introduction. So I started seeing all these different types of comics, Dark Empire, Tales of the Jedi. And at that point back then in the late 90s, these comics were readily available. They were just everywhere. A lot of different issues and story arcs that I was discovering, especially Dark Empire.
Yeah.
But Shadows of the Empire Evolution, Tales of the Jedi. So I went up to the clerk at the comic book shop and he explained all this takes place thousands of years before. So that just blew my mind. So I was just skimming through them and I was all in. So I just purchased different issues as I found them and spent a little bit more money than what I should have at that point, and just really loved and delved into this storyline. And it was truly one just big epic story that just blew my mind. How about yourself? How did you discover these comics?
Yeah, same kind of thing. I want to say around 9 or 10, I had already known about the expanded universe just a little bit, but back then I didn't know what was an expanded universe or even that's what it was called. I just knew that this video game had come out, Shadows of the Empire, and from there I ended up reading the book. And then I was at a comic store. I ended up begging my mom, I remember, to bring me to a comic store so I could get Spider-Man comics. And within that same year, I came across the Tales of the Jedi comics. And specifically, I was drawn to them, A, because it's Star Wars. And, ever since I was like 4 or 5, I've loved Star Wars. But also B, because of the covers, which I thought were just amazing and eye-catching and really kind of drew me in. Unfortunately, my comic shop didn't have complete sets, so I would end up picking up issue 1 out of 6 or 4 out of 6, and I'd have to read these issues out of order and try and piece together what was happening after the fact. But I love them, and the fact that they had uh, letters columns at the back, which you don't see really anymore in comics that much. It just reminded at that point I had already been kind of collecting comics from newsstands, but never from like an actual comic book store, right? Like I would go to the corner store and I would see like some Spider-Man comics there, and they'd have the letters column in the back. So the fact that the Star Wars comics did too, I thought was amazing, and it just kind of drew me even further into that world. I think actually that's how you and I might have originally met, because I had posted some of the letters columns on my YouTube channel, and
That's right.
you had commented. This is like we're going back like years now. You had like a couple years. You had commented on them saying how this reminded you so much of your childhood, and so I guess now it's only
Exactly.
natural that we're now having this discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kind of full circle.
yeah,
For sure. I love those columns. It's just kind of a way to see the community, what they were thinking about these comics, the impact that it made on them. Those were super fun. I love those comics. And yeah, and that was part of what you mentioned was super interesting also about how before, if you came into a certain saga or a certain series late, you had to track these issues down.
yeah,
So that was part of the fun of it. We had a couple of comic book shops in my area, so I would just drive around and just locate as many as I could issues
yeah.
that were missing. I remember kind of sidetracking a little bit. Do you remember that comic book series, The Death of Superman?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So that
Huge
took me
event
about
in the 90s.
yeah,
Yeah,
it took me about a
yeah,
year to complete the individual comics. I had to drive around to call a bunch of comic book shops, see if they had those available. So it just reminded me what you said about that. And when I started discovering these Star Wars comics, about tracking them down and how exciting it was when you had a complete collection of a certain series.
So where did you start with Tales of the Jedi? Did you start like with the Golden Age of the Sith, or did you start kind of midway through the series? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
No.
On
Okay.
I don't remember, but I remember buying them, and then yeah, from what if I remember correctly, I bought them all and then I read them. Like I
Yeah.
didn't wait, so I just well I waited, and then I believe I did start from the beginning, if memory
Yeah.
serves correctly, and then all the way through. Because I think Golden Age was published after, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, as a prequel. So
The way it
yeah,
went was like, yeah, it was the Ulic and Nomi introduction storylines, which are just called Knights of the Old Republic.
yeah,
Confusingly, Tales of the Jedi, Knights of the Old Republic. And then you had Freedom Net Uprising, Dark Lords, Sith War. Then they went back and they did Golden Age Fall, and then I think it was Redemption at the end. And
with
Redemption
Redemption.
has like a much different art style to it than the rest of the series. And actually, it's funny because it had a different art style to it. Even though it said Tales of the Jedi, for the longest time, I didn't think it was part of that series
Mm,
because the cover art looked different and the inside art looked different. It's only after I started reading them that I realized, oh my god, this is all part of the same series.
for
Yeah,
sure. I think they waited about a year, if
yeah,
I'm not mistaken,
you're
for
right.
Redemption, because I did read the series, and then not giving too much on or jumping into Redemption too much, but I remember finishing it off, and then after seeing Redemption at the comic book shop and noticed the cover of that first issue, and yeah, those I bought as they were being released, but I just thought it was a beautiful, beautiful epilogue, kind of like an exclamation mark with the series and a beautiful closure as far
Yeah,
as what happened, which we'll talk about it later. I don't want to give too much away on that,
sure.
but I just remember loving Redemption. It's just like a satisfying ending that you put the comic book down and you just kind of think of the whole journey. Because
Yeah,
this series is truly an amazing journey of a Jedi falling from grace. I mean, it could be debatable as far as really who the main protagonist or antagonist in a way, but just like if you think about the OT and the prequel trilogy, you can argue that it's Anakin's story from beginning to end, even though there's so many different characters.
right.
I kind of associate that with Ulic and his journey, but we have a lot of great characters. One of my favorites is besides Ulic, Todd Donita, the
Yes.
Select.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my favorite, probably, and Nomi Sunrider.
Yeah.
Just everything that they went through, and it was just so different, which I loved. It felt so different than the actual movies. That's one thing that I really loved. What about your favorites? What are some of your favorite characters?
Yeah. I love all the Jedi characters. Like taught there was K Droma with his metal arm, kind of like almost like foreshadowing what happens to Anakin in the prequels.
That's right.
Um, Exar Kun before he becomes evil, like this idea of like a Jedi archaeologist that gets corrupted because he just wants more and more knowledge. Ulic is obviously he's like the goat, right? He's the Jordan or LeBron of the series, so to
For
speak.
sure.
But I think Nomi is an incredible Jedi in her own right, and she's like so the woman who could do it all, right? Like she's a mother, she's a Jedi, she's like thrust into these circumstances she didn't want or ask for, and yet she rises to the occasion. But I really like and he's kind of like, no one really talks about him enough, but like Master Thon. He's
Hmm.
like the Yoda of that series, right? Because in
Right.
the same way that when Luke shows up on Dagobah, he's looking for Yoda and he comes across this like impish creature that's playing around with him. He doesn't realize it's Yoda, right? And then there's like this big reveal where it's like actually, that's Yoda the entire time. In the same way that when we first get introduced to Thon, I think there's that other Jedi. Oh god, I forget. Os Willem is riding on his back.
Oh,
Yeah,
mhm.
he's riding on his back, and so you think he's just like some dumb beast, and then it's like, no, actually, that's the Jedi Master.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. I love that for sure.
a lot of parallels.
And
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, for sure. One thing that you mentioned was Nomi Sunrider as well. One of my favorites. I think out of all Star Wars, she's one of my favorite characters. She has this amazing journey, especially it's kind of heartbreaking what happens to her.
yeah,
And what I like, there's so much character development,
yeah,
specifically about her for a minute. Um, and for you guys, this is gonna have a lot of spoilers. We're not gonna get too deep into it, but there's gonna be spoilers. It's inevitable for sure, inevitable. But with Nomi Sunrider, she had a daughter, Vima, and her husband was a Jedi who was killed, and she just is super resistant to get into the to being a Jedi for that calling. She really doesn't want to have anything to do with it, and she's kind of her path leads her that way, and she just becomes this amazing Jedi, as well as her daughter, which we see down the line. So loved her storyline and that just that character development, like I mentioned, that they really focus on.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it's relatable, right? Like with Ulic, um, there's a lot there that's relatable as well. But with Nomi, like she has to struggle for everything that she has, every step of the way, and there's just setbacks, right? Like if you think of the things that happened to her throughout that series, like I know you said you want to get too much into spoilers, but like like bad things keep happening to her, right? She loses loved ones. She's not someone who just comes right out the gate and is instantly strong in the force and is able to do everything. Like she has to train over time to get to where she is. And even then, she's after all that training, she's still not this super powerful Jedi that can do it all, right? So I think and maybe it was because they didn't realize or had any idea of how strong Jedi could potentially be. Like they didn't have the prequels as a template, right? Uh, but I think the way that Jedi were portrayed in the original trilogy and in Tales of the Jedi, they're more modest. Like their powers weren't so overstated, and so you're able to kind of focus on the character themselves as opposed to like what they were able to do, right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was great.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Especially like her, she, like you said, she wasn't just this badass Jedi right off the bat. She grew into that role, which at the end, she really is kind of in charge by the end of
Yeah,
Redemption, which I just love that story from beginning to end, her journey. And there are so many journeys within this comic that I don't know how they pulled it off, to be honest with you. They get really in depth with these characters. From her husband's death, that led her into this way, and she was always taking care of her daughter.
yeah, throughout it all.
Yeah, she didn't want to touch that lightsaber. She didn't want to. She had that trauma that really hit her, obviously because of her husband's death,
Yeah,
and was super reluctant and resistant into she was finally open into training, but as long as it wasn't with the lightsaber. So she did frustrate her mentors, I'm sure, but yeah, eventually that's what she did. She found her calling.
right. But and in even a redemption, you think about it, she's struggling between her duties as a Jedi Master and like you said, being in charge of it all, and her relationship with her daughter. Right, she's struggling between what she's trying to prioritize both. What working parent can't can't understand that, right? Like it's something that I think a lot of us struggle with is balancing our home life with our job, right, and our career and that kind of thing, and trying to be a good parent, but at the same time provide a good life for our children. And that's exactly what she's trying to do. And it's to see that happening like in this comic series in a galaxy far away, I think it's something really special.
It is, it's relatable.
Yeah,
For sure, it's relatable. Like you said, it's a beautiful topic for sure. As far as her being a single mother, taking care of her kid, and she has to do what she has to do. Ultimately, she has to take care of the galaxy, you can
yeah,
say, and at the same time raise her daughter. And then we see that her daughter is feeling left out.
yeah,
Especially, yeah. By the time we get to redemption, she feels left out, and she acts out and goes on her own journey
yeah,
because she feels this. I don't know. She just feels super kind of left out
yeah.
by her mom. She looks up to this amazing woman, and her mom's really not training her to be a Jedi at that time. So she wants to be a Jedi and sets off and goes on the search for Ulic at that point, since he's kind of in, you can say, in exile.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she gets this training. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, what? Let me ask you, how about the bad guys? Like, who do
Mhm.
you really think was a decent villain in this
I
series?
would say
Yeah,
Exarchon.
yeah,
For me, just those panels are unforgettable. They're kind of ingrained in your mind after you're reading it, and just it's not just a story; it's really the artwork that was amazing, because sometimes it's a give or take on certain, or hit or miss on some comics, but this, they just nailed it, I feel, with the storyline with Exar Kun, for example, since we're speaking about him. Just those panels with the lightsabers, the double bladed lightsabers that came out before the prequels.
Yeah.
It was just, yeah. Think about XR Kun and just those images in comic format, just the way they depicted him and his rage. And I thought it was awesome that you mentioned how he was like kind of an archaeologist, and that's how he kind of felt discovering these forbidden teachings.
Yes, that's right. And it
And
went
he had
down a
his own
very dark.
journey.
Yeah, he did have his own dark journey, which I really enjoyed actually, because as a student of history, I've always, and watching the Indiana Jones films as a kid, I I always like this idea of like going into these tombs and crypts and finding treasure, right? And that's exactly what he does. He goes on his own quest, kind of charting this ancient, long gone at that point Sith Empire, and trying to recreate what happened to them, and where they ended up, and learning a bit of the power of the dark power that they had, and using it and for his own ends eventually. One other thing I wanted to say about Exar Kun is I'll never forget when he walks into the Senate chambers and just has that battle with his master Voto Sios Boss. Right, like I can't think of anything that's as badass as that in Tales of the Jedi. Is literally in front of like the entire Senate of the Republic. There's just this lightsaber battle between good and evil. It's like imagine Palpatine and Yoda in Episode 3 fighting, but like everybody's watching them, right? Like that's kind of
Right.
almost what it would be, right?
For sure.
Yeah,
Epic.
yeah,
Epic. So what about you? What are your favorite villains?
yeah. Kun has to be at the top of the list, and he's actually one of my favorite Sith Lords. I think we've gotten a lot of interesting Sith Lords over the years in the expanded universe, but he always kind of just remains fully entrenched there. But there's this character Warb Null. He shows up in Freedom Nat Uprising, and he's the guy with like the black plated armor.
Yeah.
Just so cool. And they kept him alive for maybe it's like the Boba Fett effect. He's
Yeah.
barely gets any screen time, and yet has the coolest armor ever. I was just like,
Absolutely.
I wish they had made an action figure of Warb Null. I would have, yeah, would have loved to get it.
Just the way that they're introduced, or he's introduced in the comics when they come from underground.
Yeah,
I think they were trying to get the tomb of Freedom Nad.
yeah, that's right.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that was a super amazing intro for that character, and yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, kind of a missed opportunity.
When they came from underground, it kind of reminded me of like Ninja Turtles, like that.
Oh, that's right.
Like the machine
Yeah,
that
the
they had.
drill.
Yeah, the drill. I used to have
Yeah.
that toy as a kid, right? When we're
Oh,
talking
no
about
way.
things from like the 80s and the 90s, like I used to have that drill toys, and then when I saw it in the Tales of the Jedi as a kid, I was like, hey, it's like from Ninja Turtles, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of reminded you about a lot of stuff.
I always laughed about that because if you think about it, why didn't they just destroy? Like they were trying to move Frida Nad's tomb and Queen Aminoa's tomb from Onderon to the moon, Duxon. I think it's pronounced Duxon. That's how they pronounce it in Knights of the Republic too. And I was like, why are you moving a Sith Lord's bones? Just like destroy them. Just like throw them into a sun or something like that. What are we doing?
Yeah, exactly.
It just made no
Makes
sense
you
to me.
think.
But
Yeah.
I was thinking about it as I reread for us talking. I was like, maybe there's like some kind of like cultural preservation value because Nad was the ruler of Onderon at a certain point, and so is Queen Aminoa. So maybe the people wanted to preserve their former ruler's sarcophagus essentially, but it just never made sense to me. I was like, destroy it. If there's any
They could
ghost,
have.
just
Yeah.
destroy the ghost by destroying the bones. That's like, anyways.
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to go with it with
Yeah.
these comics, especially
Yeah.
like um 80s, late 90s. And talking about that, since you mentioned 80s and 90s, this comic book series just reminded me about those 80s and 90s, early 90s comics, the art.
The art.
So different. It was just super, this is super old school art where they would put so much dialogue in the panels and you could still enjoy the panels and the artwork, which I think the modern comics lack.
Yeah. Modern comics it's like dialogue is the first thing to go, right? They have like full splash pages where it's just art and that kind of thing. And here, because they had such little space to tell the story, right? Like 6 issues to tell something like the Sith War, like they needed a longer I think they originally had planned like something like 12 issues for the Sith War, but they can't. They have to use as much dialogue as possible to explain, what's going down. It's funny that you just mentioned that because I was recently reading, going back and reading like early Spider-Man comics, like 60s, and
Mhm.
there's just so much dialogue. And so I think like the 90s was like that sweet spot between like there's still a lot of dialogue, but there's also, like you said, you could still see what was going on in the panel.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing I noticed, that definitely a lot of dialogue. And that's how it was before. I think 80s, and I haven't really delved into 60s, but I could imagine there was a lot more
so much.
dialogue as well.
Yeah,
But you're right. This had a good balance. I mean, it was enjoyable and good balance where you can appreciate the story and these amazing panels. Since you brought up action figures, which is one character or some characters you would have liked to see as a Black Series?
yeah. I mean, I say would have liked to see, would still like to see, right? Like there's the hope remains. Because they've done some Old Republic characters. They did Bastila,
Mhm.
Malgus from the Old Republic, and Malik from Knights of the Old Republic. Actually, that's my shirt. It's the Starforge symbol
Oh,
from
nice.
KOTOR. Yeah, which is like, I mean, KOTOR was kind of born out of Tales of the Jedi, right? Like a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah.
Like a lot of, I would say, more casual fans don't realize that like Knights of the Republic exists in large part because of Tales of the Jedi. Um, if I were to have my probably Exar Kun with the double bladed
Mhm.
lightsaber would have to be my pick, right? And he's a blue double bladed lightsaber. Like it's the first time
Does
that we see like a dark sider using like a something other than red, which I always thought was cool. Yeah.
yeah,
How about
that would
you?
be cool. With the green cape.
Yeah. How,
Oh man, that would have been awesome.
is it
Awesome,
yours? Your
awesome.
answer the same, or would you choose somebody else to?
XR Kun probably number one. I have
Yeah.
to copy you on that for sure because it's true. He would have been so badass with the double bladed lightsaber, like you said, the green cloak or cape that he has,
Yeah.
and uh, Nomi for sure. Nomi Ulic. Those are the main characters I would have liked to see as a black, or I would like to see if hopefully, you never know. You
You never
never
know.
know. You know how they give some surprises every once in a while for Legends, Expanded Universe. That would be unbelievable, amazing. Even the statue, but Black Series would be cool.
Yeah. Like I think Prince Shizor just came out recently,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So I was supposed to get it like last week and it got delayed, but I maybe actually I heard that they introduced his character into the Disney canon. I'm not entirely certain, but in any event, she's always like in my mind like a pure EU character. So I would like to eventually see some Tales of the Jedi love, but I don't know. Maybe they don't want to confuse people because now there's a show called Tales of the Jedi, which has nothing to do with the comics we're talking about, but
No.
it would still be really cool because I think there were like Ulic, I think was a not Black Series figure, but like before, there was like a double. Yeah,
Oh, the comic, right? It had a comic with the two. I'm not
yeah,
sure actually.
yeah. You're right. It had the two pack, right? Like the comic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's like two action figures plus like the comic inside. But those figures are worth a fortune now. Like, good luck finding them, right? They're so
Yeah.
expensive. Um, Actually, we have a friend, like mutual friend, Only Good Games. It was funny because I thought it was done by Tales of Jedi Collecting, and then Only Good Games had collected the so, first six issues in like gold foil or
Oh,
whatever.
that's right.
And then I was like, well,
Yeah, that would have been cool.
I love this series so much now. I have to get these as well, and I ended up getting them as well.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and I think they did the same with Dark Empire as well, but it's like silver foil or something like that. But yeah,
Super rare.
and you had mentioned Dark Empire earlier. It's interesting how Dark Empire and Tales of the Jedi, they're kind of like developed like side by side, like, and these two stories link up.
They do.
Right?
They do, which I love. We've talked about the how everything connects and it's one cohesive storyline. I mean, 4,000 years roughly before Battle of Yavin, all the way till after Return of the Jedi, how they link up, and it just shows the story group the amazing job they did in making these connections. Because we do visit Tales of the Jedi
Yeah,
in the Jedi Academy trilogy as well as Dark Empire, like you said.
Dark Empire,
And
and yeah, yeah. Sorry, go ahead. No,
yeah, no, I was just gonna say about the connections within the entire storyline, the saga. Uh, I remember the Jedi Academy trilogy and the whole storyline about Exar Kun showing up again, or his spirit. That was super super cool. I love that. That was unexpected when I read it, because I read the comics first, and then you can imagine my mind blown when I read this, in the novel.
Yeah. And you get to see who Exar Kun is. It's funny because as a kid, it felt like I was discovering it at the same time Luke Skywalker was discovering it, because it's like he finds this holocron that tells them about the ancient past, and then I'm able to like learn more about the Star Wars ancient past through Tales of the Jedi comics. And I, as you said, like this is pre-prequels, right? So it's like all we had. It's all we had that happened before, because everything was before that point was like post Return of the Jedi expanded universe, or in between the films. Now we finally have something that takes place before. And
Yeah,
yeah, other than like some Marvel comics that took place like before the films or whatever, but they would kind of flash back to. But like this was it, like thousands of years. I was as a student of history and like as a fan of Star Wars, like this is like the perfect marriage for me.
perfect,
Yeah, I wanted to
perfect.
know. I wanted to know it all. How did it all start? Right? What are
Yeah,
the
yeah,
origins of the
exactly.
Force? Yeah, they didn't tell us that, but like I wanted to know everything. So
And just
yeah,
being able to visit, just that concept, having it set thousands of years before, I
yeah,
think it was a risky move from Dark Horse and Lucasfilm, a risky move, but I mean, it was extremely successful. Some of these are fan favorites. I'm so happy that it took place when it took place, as far as thousands of years before. It was just awesome seeing the ships, the way they looked depicted, the characters, the planets. So awesome. You know what would have been cool? Having a video game of Tales of the Jedi, being
I
able
know.
to play these characters.
I know. That would have been amazing. Like, I feel like it would lend itself well to like a KOTOR style RPG. Maybe like
Yeah.
update the battle system a bit for more modern gamers. But I can't even. I would I would like give half this collection away just even just play that game for an afternoon or something like that, because it would blow my mind. Uh,
Yeah.
but we did see like in terms of video games, like Tales of the Jedi creeped up in like the weirdest place. There was the Clone Wars video game.
Yeah. Ulic.
Ulic, yeah, I only learned about that years later, and so I went out and I found a copy of it, and I like dusted off my PlayStation 2 and booted it up, and I was like, oh, the PlayStation 2 still works, and I was able
Yeah.
to play through the game. The game it hasn't aged well, but the fact that it has a throwback to Tales of the Jedi is wild, and it just goes to show, like you said, it's all connected, right? Like it all counts, and something like that's important. It shows up in like the weirdest place ever in
Yeah,
the,
for
in the
sure. That
game.
was a big surprise. Huge surprise. I remember buying that game, and I remember my son was small, and I would just spend hours with that game. And then when I saw that, because I had already read the comics, just
Yeah,
seeing Ulic approach Anakin through that vision, or what was it? It was like a hologram, right?
yeah, it
If
was
I
like a
remember
hologram.
correctly,
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
just mind blowing. And it's one of those things, you put the control down, and you're like, what?
yeah,
And just mind blown for sure. I mean, so many moments in expanded universe, that things like that is what I mean. The connections, and these, like you said, unexpected, completely a Clone Wars game, and then have it tied into this amazing series, Tales of the Jedi. Super cool. Loved it. Really, really loved it at all. I mean,
yeah.
talking about your favorite story arc from the five of this second part, the five story arcs. Do you have a favorite?
Hmm. Um, Probably redemption, but I feel like that's like the easy answer, because redemption is so impactful, and I almost feel like in order for redemption to be as impactful as it is, you really have to read through everything before. So Dark Lords of the Sith would be maybe my better answer. And the reason why is twofold. Number one is because it was the first graphic novel, it was the first story arc that I actually read in its entirety. So the because I told you I was collecting like issues here and there, but I found like a graphic novel of Dark Lords of the Sith and was able to read through it all. And then the second is because of it's like where all I think first of all it's like the most internally consistent storyline out of all of them. Um, and it sows the seeds, right? Like Master Arca dies in Dark Lords of the Sith. I'll never forget that cover where Ulic is just holding Arca's robes.
Hmm. That's right.
Um,
That was beautiful.
Yeah, just like you could see the anguish on his face, and um, that's where I think we kind of start seeing like Ulic and Nomi develop this relationship, right? And Nomi trains as a Jedi Knight, and all this crazy stuff happens. And I know it's kind of bookended by the Sith War on one end and the Freedom Net Uprising on the other end, but I think Dark Lords of the Sith is probably the best of Tales of the Jedi, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It's an amazing storyline, and I have to say, redemption for me.
Yeah,
Just I remember just falling in love with that because I love these comics, the Tales of the
yeah,
Jedi, all these storylines. But then when Redemption came out, first of all, like you mentioned, the artwork was just so different, which I'm glad at that point that they changed it up. I
yeah,
think it's appropriate, especially taking place in the snow and Ulic being in exile and Vima's storyline, the daughter. I believe it took place 10 years later, right?
yeah,
It was a whole decade later, and just fell in love with that story.
yeah.
And I think he was given, I don't know, kind of a proper. Well, I'm not sure about the end about how he went out, but
A lot
that's
of
the way
people
it
say
happened.
that. Yeah, a lot of people say that. Yeah,
But I mean, that's the way it happened, and still, besides that, how he went out, just that overall, I think was beautifully made. The whole comic redemption, because he does go through a lot. He kills his own brother.
yeah.
He does. I don't know, from Dark Lords of the Sith jumping onto Sith War. I believe what it's 6 months. Keep forgetting
I think
the
it
timeline.
Yeah, like Dark Lords takes place in 3997 before Battle of Yavin, and Sith War takes place 3996. But like, I don't know that like a full year has passed in between them. But you got to give it some time because at the end of Dark Lords, if you remember, Ulic and Exar Kun do that like whole Predator handshake with one another.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was
Uh,
cool, Fred.
they do the
Yeah, you
Dylan.
son of a bitch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the whole
Yeah,
thing at the end, and so at that point, their pact is formed, their dark
yeah,
pact, and then in Sith War, like they already have their forces, kind of, and that's when they get the Mandalorians to join them as well. Like Ulic fights Mandalore. Uh, so I assume like some months would have passed in between those two events. So yeah, I think about 6 months, if not
yeah.
more. Yeah.
Got it. Because they look different. They have different armor.
Yes.
Oleg, they have that was cool. I like the way they did that. That yeah, you could tell that time went on because they're at a different point
Yeah.
in their journey, and becoming more evil, conquering and doing their thing, and they just look completely out of it, completely just gone
Yeah.
off the rails to the dark side. And I love the way they depicted them as far as their armor and everything, and I love that. But yeah, I would still say Redemption. I do agree with you. Dark Lords of the Sith. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. That's kind of like right in the middle.
Yeah.
A lot of things take place. That's kind of like the start of the downfall of Ulic
Yeah.
in Dark Lords of the Sith. His, I believe he had the right intentions. It's kind of what Luke went through in Dark Empire,
Yeah.
in a way. But I mean, they warned him, and yeah, he kind of went to the place of no return in a way.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that whole, once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny kind of notion. And Luke in the expanded universe was fortunately able to escape that the dark path, and with the love of his sister, right? But in Ulic's case, he wasn't so fortunate, and he paid for it at the end, right? And I remember like when we were talking about doing this stream, we talked about like different themes, right? Like themes in Star Wars, and I think the biggest theme for me in Star Wars has always been redemption,
Mhm.
right? It's the redemption of Vader. Um, People always talk about like the return of the Jedi and what that title means, right? It's like, does it mean? Well, I always took it to mean like the Jedi are coming back, right? Like Luke is the going to be the founder of like this new Jedi Order, essentially. But other people in more recent times have said like, does it mean like Anakin, coming back to like the Jedi,
Mm,
back to the light, right? Like the return
yeah,
of the Jedi. Which I mean, it could be interpreted that way, right? And
it
so,
could.
yeah,
Yeah, a lot of things happen throughout. Just Oleg causing chaos, and he hurt a lot of people. Obviously, his own brother, his love interest,
yeah,
uh, and just hurt a lot of people falling to the dark side. One character that almost forgot to mention that I loved was Silvar,
yeah,
because Oleg influences her lover or her mate right? And he passes, and she has this rage. Almost, it's kind of teased that she's almost going to the dark side, which is
Totally.
being born because she has so much anger that she, in redemption storyline, she just wants to go after this guy and essentially kill him. You know,
Yeah.
even though she's a Jedi, but she just has this that's kind of taking over. And she's, remember that exercise she was doing, and she was just, I don't know if it was an exercise or something they encountered, that she has this rage that she wanted to extinguish, this rage that she had, and killed a bunch of these creatures. And I forgot the
Yeah.
quote, but it
On
was,
Ryloth, she was with Toctanita, and he brought her to Ryloth, and she was fighting in the caves or whatever, right? These creatures.
yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, Silvar she's the realest Jedi. And the reason why is because I think that, the Jedi are beings, right? They think, they feel, they're sentient, they're intelligent beings. And so I think it's weird to expect them to be perfect. And Silvar shows what happens when a Jedi is pushed to their limit, and yet they still decide to
Perfect.
choose the light, right? In the end,
Exactly. No, I love that.
she doesn't strike Ulic down when she has the chance to. And he basically says, like, go on, kill me, and like, I deserve it. And she's like, no, I can't. Like, her humanity, well, I guess she's a cat person, like
Mhm.
Cathar, but like her, her innateness, her innate goodness, like comes back to her, and I think that's like what being a Jedi is about, right? That's why people say like Obi-Wan Kenobi's like the greatest Jedi, because he went through the ringer and still chose light. Although I would argue that Silvar is almost an even better Jedi. I'm gonna get like flamed for this and saying Silvar is a better Jedi than Obi-Wan Kenobi. The reason why is because
She is awesome, though.
she is pushed right to the edge. Like Obi-Wan, we never see him get like that angry ever. But like she's
Mhm.
pushed right to the edge, and she still she manages to just hold on to her goodness. I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That moment with Ulic, that I thought she was gonna kill him. Like,
Yeah.
as I was reading it, I'm like, okay, this is the end, because I could already feel in the comic that I was reading the reaching the last pages and the ending,
Yeah.
and I thought, okay, that's how he's gonna go out. But one thing that I love, I have it here in front of me, that she says she has her lightsaber in front of Ulic, and he's like you said, he's kind of just like, okay, I'll take it. And she's like, damn you, after all this time of hating, of all the people to free me from my anger, it was you. And I love that moment because she's about to, and she realizes that, yes, still, that he's able to extinguish this for her, but in a different way. She just kind of gave into her goodness and just decided not to kill him, and she kind of just let it go, and the rage was gone. And I love that moment.
We see the same thing happen to Luke in Return of the Jedi, right? Like he's
Mm,
full of rage, and he's just beating Vader down with his lightsaber, just like, going crazy on him. And then he realizes, like, look what I've become, right? And like he sees how this dark, imposing figure has been reduced to nothing, and it's like that kind of makes him come to his senses, right? But not everybody's that strong. Like some people would just finish the job, right?
yeah,
And that he Luke, in the same way that Silvar does, they're able to kind of like pull themselves back. And it's actually like one of my favorite moments in the saga is when Luke takes his lightsaber, he just throws it aside. He's like, I'll
mhm.
never turn to the dark side. I'm a Jedi Knight like my father before me. And it's like that idea. I'm going to go on a mini tangent here, but like that
No, go
idea
ahead.
that like a lightsaber is like so incidental to being a Jedi, right? Like there's this kind of like notion that people vacillate on in the expanding universe. Like it's like in the prequels, it's like, this is your life, Anakin. Like he gives him back his lightsaber, Obi-Wan. He's like, this is like, don't ever lose this. But like the lightsaber is so not important. It's like the lightsaber is the tool of the Jedi. The Jedi is like the person and what they decide to do. And so I always thought like that's why Palpatine and Yoda never had lightsabers. I mean, obviously the prequels show that was
Mhm.
incorrect. They do have lightsabers, but like I thought it was because they had reached a pinnacle of power and wisdom, or dark wisdom in Palpatine's case, that was so high that they just didn't need these things anymore, these tools, right? They're like mere toys, trinkets, right? And when Palpatine refers to like a lightsaber as like a Jedi weapon or whatever, right? I thought for sure, like he's a wizard. He doesn't need a wand, essentially,
They're
right?
beyond that.
Well, they're beyond that. But in the same way, when like Luke throws his lightsaber away, I was like, it's the same thing, right?
You're
So,
right.
anyways, and then we find out Master Thrawn even had a lightsaber in
Oh, that's right. That
Tales
was
of the
cool.
Jedi. I was like, how does he
Yeah.
use it? How does he use it?
How?
Does he
Yep.
like put it in his mouth or something? Like bite?
Possibly, possibly. I'm sure there was a way. But yeah, no, I love that. I love that so many different themes and about Luke. I completely agree. He could have gave in, just like Silvar in this point. Like you said, it parallel certain themes with the movie characters. And yeah, I thought really she was gonna go out by Silvar, but love that moment. And when she realizes that, just like Luke, like you mentioned, and
Yeah,
going back to her rage before she met up with Ulic, um, she was with Todd Donita,
yeah,
like you mentioned, on Ryloth, and she had this anger. And one thing that I love was that I have it right over here. Todd Donita told her, "You didn't get rid of your anger, Silvar. You gave into it." He says, "You're walking the path of anger, and you know where that will lead." So you, what did it say? You have to work this out yourself, Silvar. So she's kind of getting these warnings because Todd Donita, which is once again one of my favorites. I love his character, just super wise as well. But just they're getting these warnings, just like what Luke did in Dark Empire. They're warning him about going to this path, and yeah, she got these warnings, but finally she just didn't give in, which I loved. Other characters that are important, they're kind of in the background in a way, but they really stir up these crazy moments. Are Alima Satel and her brother, right? Alima and
it's
I
her. Yeah,
forgot.
I think it's her cousin, right? Alima.
Alima and Satel, I
Yeah.
believe, right?
Are they, is, how do you pronounce it? Keto or keto? Like
Keto.
diet.
I would say
Keto?
keto. We'll go
Keto?
with that.
Yeah, keto. That's how I pronounce it too. And yeah, they people don't talk about them enough, but they're really like the catalyst for all of
They
this, right?
are.
Dark Lords, yeah.
They
But
caused this mess, right? This chaos. They're
yeah,
kind of like in the background. They're or not investigating, but they're searching for these Sith artifacts, and that leads to this. That moment kind of just leads to this war,
whole
this
mess.
epic war, and chaos completely. So they're not in the forefront, but they're there and they're important to this storyline because they're the ones who kind of, in a way, like you said, a catalyst. They kind of caused this 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 mess, pretty much. I would say.
It's crazy how Ulic becomes Alima's lover, essentially, right? And
Yeah.
yet never, like him and Nomi, like they were heading down that path, but it never happened, right? Like it never really materialized into anything. Yet here he is with this woman who's basically like a dark force user, essentially, right? She can create, like, what is it, like illusions with the force.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I don't love their characters, but like they're not
Mhm.
meant to be loved, right? Like you're
No,
meant to like hate them, essentially.
they're
And
sort of like pawns in the story. They
yeah,
really they're important because they cause catastrophes, but they're kind of in the background a little bit. So they're not really mentioned too much. We don't visit them too much in the storyline, but yeah, they do cause a lot of trouble for sure for a lot of our characters. One other thing that I loved about this, there's so much, but the battle meditation. I think this is the first time we saw this in the EU
yeah,
with Nomi Sunrider,
yeah,
where it was mentioned. I thought that was extremely cool. Her journey and her ability
yeah,
to being able to do this
yeah,
battle meditation, which is visited obviously in other parts of the expanded universe.
yeah. So like Bastila in KOTOR is a known user of Jedi battle meditation. Um, it's funny. I think Zahn even talks about it in the Thrawn trilogy, because there's a he implies that, or maybe not even implies, like flat out says, I think it's like a conversation that's happening between Pelion and Thrawn, talks about how the Emperor at the Battle of Endor was essentially doing a form of battle meditation, and when he dies, that's why everything starts to fall apart and the fleet goes into disarray. Uh, and maybe that's like why I think Thrawn wanted to recruit Joru Sabaoth, right, to help
Mm.
with his fleet to use that battle meditation. But it's funny how like you see this notion being developed, and I don't even know, maybe because yeah, no,
And also, just like anything that we absolutely love and enjoy, sometimes we can't help but think about missed opportunities.
yeah,
One thing that we kind of talked about this already, but missed opportunities would be for me create making it bigger. For example, video games, action figures. I really feel Like I'm satisfied with the story, I really am. So that's why I kind of think about missed opportunities as far as like it would have been extremely cool having a video game and also action figures. I do enjoy though that they had the CDs kind of narrating the whole comic.
Yeah.
I think Dark Lords of the Sith. I like that, but yeah, definitely it would have just been so awesome having the action figures and a video game. What
Let me
about
ask
yourself?
you before I answer, because it has to do with my answer. But have you played Knights of the Old Republic at all? Like, have you ever
I'm
played that?
actually playing it right now
Okay,
for the
yeah.
first
So there you
time.
go. So there's a missed opportunity right there. Is like that game takes place like 50 years after I think the events of Tales of the Jedi or thereafter. And you really have to dig deep for Tales of the Jedi references. Now, John Jackson Miller's comic KOTOR does a pretty good job of soft linking the two, right? You kind of see what
Mhm.
happens in between, but everybody makes the comment that like, hey, this world, the world building itself, like looks like the prequels. It doesn't look like the ancient Tales of the Jedi world. And I think SWOTOR kind of does a bit of both, but still like looks like the prequels because that's what people identify as Star Wars, right? Like that kind of thing. So I think maybe just seeing a bit more of the connective tissue of Tales of the Jedi and other parts of the EU. I know there were like some rights issues, like they couldn't use Nomi, for instance, or
Mm.
they couldn't use the Sunrider last name, I believe. There was like a
Oh,
rights
really?
issue. Yeah, because I think it was like an infringement on like Jeep Sunrider, something like that. So
Mm.
they couldn't use the Sunrider last name going forward. Um, but I think there is still a reference to Nomi in KOTOR. You really have to dig deep for it, though. And then there's a few more references in SWOTOR and that kind of thing. But as well in SWOTOR, they have like all those different videos that show like what happened up until now, like the history of the galaxy up until like that point in the game. And they talk about like Exar Kun and the Sith War, and they talk about the events of the golden age of the Sith and the fall of the Sith Empire, and SWOTOR is kind of
Yes.
almost like born out of that, right? So, but just to see a bit more of like the connective tissue would have been nice. And for me, I agree with you. I think the story itself is really great. I would have loved though if the Sith War could have been a bit longer. I think that it
Mm.
suffered from being only 6 issues, and that's why I said Dark Lords more than the Sith War in terms of my favorite arc, other than Redemption, is because I do think that it could have been so much more epic. Like something like the Sith War could have been like 50 issues if they wanted it to be,
Could have
right?
been.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I never thought about that. That would
And
have
then
been cool.
the big missed opportunity is that Mandorla book that was supposed to come out. That was supposed to be about Nomi and Vima. It was
Oh,
supposed
really?
to
That
be,
was
yeah,
planned?
it was a planned book. I think it was supposed to be written by Alex Irvin, and it wasn't canceled because of the Disney acquisition. I think it was just canceled like before the Disney acquisition even took place. Thought we're
Yeah.
this close to getting a Tales of the Jedi novel because that's the big one for
Imagine.
me. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Oh man. Yeah, that's some of these things just are heartbreaking, honestly.
I
Like
know.
certain things that they had planned. I mean, we've discussed this before. Things
Yeah,
that were planned and were canceled or due to the buyout, it didn't happen. But God, these ideas that they had were just incredible. Like that, like what the one you just mentioned would have been epic for sure. Would have been amazing. A novel in this, with these characters and everything, maybe elaborating more on the Sith War, like you said, or Dark Lords of the Sith, that would have been extremely cool. But yeah,
this
yeah.
leads me to
Wow,
a
if
question for
only.
you.
Yeah.
If you were to write a Tales of the Jedi book, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but what would you do?
If I were to write a Tales of the Jedi book, I would have just let's see, maybe on Exar Kun a little bit more,
Yeah,
making a novel on him, and then on Vima definitely post right after Redemption.
yeah,
That's what I would have focused on. How about
yeah.
yourself?
Um, hmm. It would have been kind of fun to maybe show how free. There's like kind of this weird. It's not really a contradiction, but um, when you read, I believe Ulic Droma and the Beast Wars of Onderon, so that first arc, it implies that Onderon was just recently discovered by the Republic, but we know that Friedan Nad was the ruler there 400 years previous, and that he was taken out by a Jedi strike team. So I would tell the story about how Frida Nad like came to power essentially like as a tyrant on that planet. Um, well, because he was a Jedi originally, right? He was a Jedi originally. He never made knight status. He ended up leaving the order. Tracked. I would do like a whole Frida Nad like epic, like 700-page book, showing how he like Ulic or not Ulic, sorry, like Exar, he retraces the ancient Sith Empire, finds forbidden knowledge, becomes a Dark Lord, takes over Onderon, installs himself as like tyrant king, whatever, then gets taken out by a Jedi strike force. And in order to keep all of that secret, like they decide either not to tell the Republic, or they tell the Republic, but only like the top officials know, and so they kind of just bury that entire history. I think that would be a really interesting book.
For sure.
Yeah.
As far as I know, this is all we got from Freedom Nad, right? This comic series. There's nothing else mentioned on him. I don't recall.
There's the Tales of the Jedi source book, which which only covers, I think, up to the end of the Freedom Net Uprising. So it didn't cover, or maybe does it cover a bit of Dark Lords? I think it only covers the first two arcs story, or I guess the first two story arcs. So like that Knights of the Old Republic and then the Freedom Net Uprising. It doesn't cover anything post that. And sadly, we don't get anything on the first two arcs, Golden Age and Fall. Like no West End Games material on that. But it has Freedom Nad's story in it, and that's how a lot of people came to learn that he was a Jedi at one point that just failed and ended up like killing his master or a master and fleeing. Other than that, I don't think so. I think that's it.
Got it.
Yeah,
I ended up buying that source book not too long ago. A couple of months ago, I tracked them down, and I haven't read it. I have it boxed up right now.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna definitely delve into that, and I can't wait because it was a hardcover and just had that image of Ulic, that iconic image of Ulic.
The iconic image with the holding up the lightsaber. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Let me ask you if there could be one thing, like one secret that you could have like revealed about like this series or whatever. I guess I'll give you an example. So like mine would be probably learning who that Dark Lord was that appears to Ulic and Exar. I think it's supposed to be Marco Ragnos because it has like his horn helmet, right? But it doesn't really make sense that, anyways, how was it that this spirit just comes out of nowhere? I almost thought like there's some internet theories that say that that's like Emperor Vitiate from SWTOR or something like that. But I would want to know specifically like who that was intended to be. If it was intended to be Marco Ragnos, like why didn't he just come out and say his name?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't even really look like Ragnos, right? But anyways, that's sort of my like what would I want to know more about or have like a secret reveal. Like I'm just curious, like was there anything in the story like that you would want to know more about?
Got it. I would like to know more about what happens immediately after the Sith War.
Yeah.
Leading up to Redemption. Not too much because I do enjoy. I mean, I really do like that they jump 10 years later. But I'd like to know a little bit of something as far as Vimo's already older, Nomi's already established, she's kind of in charge. So kind of a little bit after Sith War and kind of giving us a preview of what's to come. And that's it. Because I do like the fact that, like I mentioned before, that we do have a gap. I mean, gaps aren't always good, but I enjoyed this one. But just a little bit more on that. That's kind of what I would like.
Have you ever read that short story? It's in one of the Tales comics where it's Duron Droma, so it's like Kay and Ulic's cousin, and he goes on like a quest with there's another Twi'lek Jedi and like this human woman Jedi, and they talk a bit about sort of like it takes place in between Redemption and the Great Sith War because they're hunting down Sith beasts. Yeah, it's called like the Great Hunt. Not the story itself. I forget what the story is called. I think it's called like maybe like Light and Darkness or something like that. But they talk about how like the Jedi Council is tightening up rules, right? And so one of them would be, of course, because we see in the prequels, Jedi cannot marry. And yet we see in Tales of the Jedi that they can marry. And so I think as a result of the Sith War, you see like almost like a reactionary force within the Jedi Order grow bigger. And it's interesting that I think, if we were to guess like what happens in between potentially Nomi herself, because she becomes Grandmaster, but like potentially Nomi comes in, or a sect of the Jedi come in, and they start imposing harsher rules on like what Jedi life looks like, because they don't want people to turn to the dark side. Because the Sith War was a traumatic event, right? You have Jedi turning against Jedi for the first time since like, in its 25,000 year history, since the beginning, essentially, right?
For sure.
Or this first schism. So it could be very traumatic in thousands of years, where you have like brother turn against sister and vice versa, and start killing one another. I could see how that might lead to stricter controls, right?
Yeah, makes
Yeah,
sense. Makes sense. And no, I haven't read that. And when those Tales comics came out, I really didn't I think I bought the first few and I saw it wasn't for me, but then now
yeah,
down the line, what, decades later almost,
yeah,
I'm seeing that there are true gems. It's kind of, you have to pick and choose to see which ones really go along with the main storyline. Because a lot of them are kind of like what ifs,
yeah.
but the one like you mentioned and a couple of other ones that I heard about are inspiring me to track them down and see what these are about. Because I'd love to read that story that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's in one of the last issues, because I think the last 3 or 4 are canon to the EU. They made a concerted effort right at the end of the Tales run to like now be within continuity, which is like,
Mhm.
at this point you've had 20 issues of like nonsense. Now
Yeah,
you're
exactly, exactly.
it's hard to, but so yeah, definitely read that one, and it talks
Okay.
a bit about what happens in between. But definitely we need to know about that a bit more. I would agree with you
Yeah,
completely.
yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. So it's been a long time. It's over what, 20, 25 years since this
yeah,
oh, over, yeah, over something over 25 years, I
I
believe,
know.
if I math it
Try not to
correctly.
try not to think about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly. Wow. So me reading it, it's 2025, reading it now, I love it even more. I love the
yeah,
art, which is crazy because there's been, we talked about it before offline, how much I love 80s movies, and you brought up Predator, those kind of movies. And there's some, most of them, I still love. There's some that I go back to, and I don't have the same feeling like I had before. I'm like, okay, maybe this wasn't that good, but this this comic I love even more with time. So there's so much time has passed that I've embraced it even more. I enjoy reading it, rereading it, love the characters more, and just read up to redemption and put it down and just have that. Wow, that was a ride. That was quite the ride. How do you feel about this comic since so much time has passed?
exact same. I feel like I talk so much about these comics online, to the point where people are like, "Hey, you really like Tales of the Jedi? You're obsessed with it." But the reason why is because these stories are so good, and I feel really capture the spirit of Star Wars in a way that a lot of EU media, just frankly, as much as I love the EU, doesn't. And you could see like George had an impact on these stories, but he also had involvement in these stories too, right? Like he was
Yep,
more involved in the early EU after Dark Empire as a result of Dark Empire, and Tales of the Jedi, I think, benefited from it, right? Like Veach and
I agree.
Anderson would send him like questionnaires, and he would answer questions. And so you see, like I think it's faithful to his vision. I think it's unique enough that it stands on its own as a great story, and I think that it withstands the test of time, right? Like you said,
Agreed.
some stuff doesn't, right?
Yeah, it doesn't. And I feel when I read this as a whole saga, I just think this is why I love Star Wars. We
Yeah,
love the movies, the six movies, but I read this and I'm like, wow. I mean, among other comics and novels, there's so many, but this is an example of finishing it and thinking, wow, this is why I love this. This is why I'm so into Legends, into expanded universe.
same.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Um
well one quick thing. I mean, Tales of the Jedi is the reason why I am online talking about Star Wars in the first place, because I specifically thought at the time, I think it was back in 2021, I was like, why is nobody talking about Tales of the Jedi? And I think it's because a lot of Star Wars fans have moved on to the new stuff, and that's fair enough. But I think
yeah.
even amongst the fans who still like the old stuff too, Tales of the Jedi is not it's not like The Force Unleashed, right? It's not
Mhm.
like it's comic media. So I remember even just getting friends to read the EU, and then they find out that they've read the Thrawn trilogy, and they would read Jedi Academy trilogy, and they're like, wait a second, Luke turned to the dark side. When did this happen? I was like, it happened in a comic book. And they're like, what do you mean a
Yeah,
comic book? Important stories can't happen in a comic book. But we've seen that, like with Tales of the Jedi, yes, an important story can happen in a comic book, and they can do it
for
well.
sure.
Yeah,
For sure. And this is debatable, but then again, what we feel really isn't debatable. I mean, it's what we feel. And my
it's
point
how
is
it's
that,
left. Yeah,
yeah, my point is what I feel is that the storyline in the comics are just as important as the novels. I mean, I know many might not agree with that, but which is fine. But honestly, like if you're watching and you are curious about comics, these specifically, there is plenty of dialogue, there is character development like we went over, there's things that impact legends or expanded universe as a whole. I mean, I really well, we really recommend
yeah.
people to get into it and read them. They're amazing, honestly.
Oh, you're doing your Rogue Squadron series right now on your
Yeah,
channel, right? So I mean, like, it's a perfect example of something that, like, of a series where you get character development and you get, I think a great tale and a great epic. And I think a lot of comics, and not like necessarily Star Wars comics, but I think a lot of comics in general are lacking that these days.
for sure. Like we spoke initially about the dialogue, we got really a lot of world building, a lot of new characters, a lot of emotions going
Yeah,
through reading this whole saga. So this is actually part two.
yeah.
Next time we're gonna go ahead and delve into the first part of Tales of the Jedi, which has to do with Golden Age of the Sith and Fall of the Sith Empire. I'd like to thank Marcel. Thank you so much for jumping on and talking Tales of the Jedi. I know you're a huge fan, so that's why I wanted you to just chat with you and hang out over here and talk about this amazing series.
Thanks for having me. Seriously.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll see you guys later on in part one, actually, going back in time a little bit and going over Golden Age of the Sith and Fall of the Sith Empire. Thank you guys so much for joining us.